At last, we are talking about college basketball. Woohoo! Both Howard and I were on the scene during this past weekend's second annual Shark Beauty Women's Champion Classic. Not only did we see four top 25 teams, but we also got to experience a Red Panda halftime show, in addition to some very interesting looking beauty masks worn courtside. And then there was a mix-up between Sydney Colson and Isabel Harrison. But anyway, we are your hosts on this journey. I'm Jackie Powell.
I'm Howard Megdal.
And we are going to be bringing you some analysis from what we saw this weekend, in addition to talking about what net and gross revenues are. And yes, that is CBA talk. But so our top story, or as we call it here, number one at the 9, is about one of the main takeaways we had from the Shark Beauty Classic, and it involves defense. So Howard, what's this main takeaway?
All right, well, let's put the clock up. I'll give myself that same 60 seconds. Here we go. So listen, when people think about Iowa and UConn, they think about offense. You think about UConn, maybe the preeminent player in UConn history. That's a whole other subject for another time, Diana Taurasi. Certainly we don't talk about defense first. Caitlin Clark comes to define Iowa. We don't think about defense first. But in both of these instances, defense is changing. In UConn's case, a throwback to an earlier era. In Iowa, it's a very different look. We talked to Gino Auriemma about the way in which defense has helped to define his very best teams. And we talked to Jan Jensen about the fact that Saturday notwithstanding, this is the best Iowa defensive team we've seen in a long time, maybe since the great C. Vivian Stringer left for the banks of the Raritan. So we're going to get into it at first, number one at the 9.
Well done with what? 2 seconds to spare? 2.5 seconds to spare?
I feel very good about that. Nothing left on the shot clock.
That is true. And still made the buzzer-beating shot. So, okay, I think, are we talking about the UConn defense first or the Iowa defense first?
Let's start with UConn because their defense was even on display on Saturday. I know we've talked about this on the show. I've written about this over at the 9 Daily, about the fact that having Sarah Strong be able to do everything, be able to simultaneously guard guards and protect the rim. And I mean that quite literally. I mean, in the same possession can be somebody who protects the rim, but is the closeout on three-point shooters is a very big deal. But it goes so far beyond that. Take me through, Jackie, from your perspective, some of the other UConn contributors on the defensive end who really catch your eye.
Well, I think it comes down to two of UConn's, I'll call them role players, and that's KK Arnold and Blanca Quinones.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really funny, actually. I think it was maybe Azzy Fudd who, when she was asked about Blanca's performance on Saturday, she said, I've been really impressed with how Blanca's defense has improved. And I think Gino Auriemma said the same thing. And the thing about Blanca Quinones is that she has always had the tools. There aren't proper numbers as to what her correct height and correct wingspans are, but guesstimating based on her standing next to Sarah Williams, I'd say that she's as tall as Sarah Williams. So we're talking 6'4".
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to that wingspan, I mean, it could be 6'5" wingspan we're talking, could be more. Can't imagine it to be less.
She's using her length, whatever it is. And again, to your point, and let's hear from Gino about this. It's almost like a cumulative thing rather than this individual, that individual. But here's why it matters for the way UConn plays. Let's hear from Gino about this.
About how she really has noticed a change in your team's defensive identity over the years. I guess just how would you describe this year's team's defensive identity?
Well, we've had a lot of identities over the years. A lot of people are probably more familiar, more talking about offensively. You know, we try to take some risks on offense. You know, try to get concepts out there that maybe other people are doing, maybe they're not, and try to do them our way, and try to use the offensive talent that we have. But you know, going back to 1995, you know, like that '95 team, uh, all of Tina's teams and Maya's teams and all of Stewie's teams, D and Sue's teams, you couldn't score on those guys. And Bruno would always say that. Bruno would always go, Connecticut's dirty secret. Everybody thinks it's their offense because you can't get a shot against them. Now, fast forward to the last 3 or 4 years, you can get any shot you wanted against us a few years ago. We didn't have the ability to play at a level of intensity that we want to play because we had to save everybody for 38, 39 minutes. So we really couldn't, and we didn't have the number of people to just keep running them in there. So we were able to go back to who we used to be, and we haven't had a chance to be that, you know, probably since Fisa, Lou, Kia Nurse, you know, Stewie and Mariah Jefferson and Tuck. We had a lot of guys on that team, you know.
A lot of guys. I would have to also add Gabby Williams, let's not forget, and her ability to disrupt on the defensive end. And so it is worth remembering in the moment it was happening, it was possible to feel like, oh, UConn's in a new era. But now that they have, knock on wood, moved past the injuries, it was just a brief detour from the way UConn has historically thrown numbers at you offensively and defensively. So it was really significant. But Jackie, the bigger thing for me, and I say this, you know, obviously I've got Becoming Caitlin Clark right behind me. So makes a great Christmas gift, not too late. But a little too late for Hanukkah, but so be it. Also, nice early 2026 birthday present. There we go. How was that for self-promotion? But Becoming Caitlin Clark, we talked a lot about the offensive side of the ball. It is the way in which Lisa Bluter and Jan Jensen were forged in a 6-on-6 atmosphere. And so I was struck by the fact that entering Saturday's game, Iowa was 75th in the country in defensive points per possession. They are never in the top 100. They're never there. Lisa Bluter, I remember asking her after Caitlin's freshman year, saying, what do you think your defense needs to get to? They were 338th out of 349 at the time. And she said, we were an F. If we get to a C-, we'll be where we need to be. And
So
that's basically where they got to.
Well, so now under the new Jan Jensen regime in year 2, I guess I would have loved, to have asked her what that grade is now. Are we talking B-? Are we talking just a B? And I mean, I think it's definitely better in year 2 of the Jan Jensen era. And she really pointed to Kylie Feuerbach as this anchor who really, their defensive schemes, it runs right through her.
Yeah, let's hear what she had to say, because that's a really good point, is that Kylie was real limited on Saturday, and that absolutely played a role. I don't know. I think Kylie's a great player. I don't think she's stopping Sarah Strong. Might be able to slow down AZ. Sarah Strong, I don't know who's stopping Sarah Strong. I don't know who's stopping Sarah Strong when she gets to the next level. That's where we are with Sarah Strong. But let's hear Jan on why defense matters so much. And then I'm going to share with you a theory as to why I think they are better defensively than they've been. Defensively, I know obviously there's some challenges out of today's game, but just this year, and you came in top 75 in opposing points per possession, you know, it seems like much more of this identity. Can you kind of take me through that evolution and what level you need to see this defense be at for you guys to reach the goals you have?
Yeah, you know, I think, I mean, UConn is just they're the standard, right? Kylie Furbach is our key defender, and she's the key. It runs all through her defensively, and she was not able to play her normal minutes. She only played about 9, and that was an unsteady feeling because she's kind of the heart and soul of our defense, and so not having her, that kind of threw us a bit. And then we were really forced to go a lot of different lineups. Kylie's kind of an energizer bunny. She's very fit. She hardly comes out. So that threw us defensively. But I would have, liked to have seen what would have happened had we not had that mishap. If you're going to stay in games with teams that are as great as UConn, you need everybody every minute. And we didn't have her. And then we didn't play very particularly well in our inside game.
So here's what's interesting to me about this. Even though they gave up 90 points to UConn, their overall national ranking in defensive points per possession per her hoop stats is now 66th in the country. Actually got a little bit better heading into, again, that's other movement, and it's other teams who are dealing with various things, including playing in the conference. Well, Iowa's about to do this. Iowa's about to find out some significant things about their defense against Penn State and playing Keomi McMiller and Gracie Merkel. Gracie Merkel inside in particular. It's going to be really interesting to see whether they are better defensively on the interior. And then they're playing Nebraska and sophomore sensation Britt Prince. So we're going to learn by the end of 2025 some big things. But here's my theory. This is the first roster with Jan Jensen players infused into it. Now, that's a bit of a complicated thing. Jan Jensen was the primary recruiter, the closer extraordinaire for Lisa Bluter, but these are Jan Jensen selected targets. These are players who, end of the day, this is the current staff, which has so much Lisa Bluter influence and will, as long as the folks who coached under her are part of her coaching tree. But I wonder whether there is a change in defensive capacity from the folks who they are going after. It's an interesting thing to see. So Iowa, not just offense anymore. UConn never was just offense, now have the numbers to go with it. But we did see 2 other teams that are really interesting to me. And so when we think about Louisville and Tennessee, Jackie, why don't we start on the Tennessee side and just what did you see out of what the Vols were not able to do on Saturday? They need to.
Yeah, it's so funny because I think the brilliant thing about this event is that, at least in these 2-year windows, is that you can really track the progression of programs. Yeah. And I think Tennessee is one that stands out in that regard, because a year ago, they were bursting onto the scene in this new system by Kim Caldwell. Expectations were so low, and she and that team superseded them. And so they come back a year later and things look very different. And the success that they had in year 1 has not translated in year 2. And so we were able to see the reasons why on paper, the reasons why they've struggled against opponents within the top 25. And so what it really came down to against Louisville was a lack of rebounding and a struggle to really power their transition offense and for their transition offense to be consistent. And what I mean by that is Tennessee is still forcing a ton of turnovers. That's their bread and butter. But then when they got into the open floor, they would turn it over again, or they wouldn't know what to do with it. And so Kim Caldwell spoke about how, her team wasn't very disciplined. They weren't going after the 50-50 balls. But we also have to understand that this is a very different roster than the one that we saw in 2024.
Mm-hmm.
And
just to that point, you're seeing it at the team level as well, what you're talking about in terms of being able to make up for a relative scarcity of defensive rebounds because you are pressing with an edge in turnover difference and second chance points. They were about even in second chance points against Louisville, and Louisville crushed them on the boards. Coming into Louisville and to that game, Tennessee was seeing significant improvement on the defensive rebounding percentage numbers. They were actually top 75, where they had been 259th last year in the country. And I've said this before, basketball is math. And so you have to find those numbers somewhere. So everything you said is true. It also, again, comes down to missing Ruby Whitehorn, who was somebody who they were counting on, somebody who was kicked off the team for reasons our Stephanie Cloy has been all over at the Nine Basketball, if you want to read more details about it. And I don't think Kim Caldwell had a choice. This is not to criticize her for that decision. Quite the contrary. In fact, she did something, and it was the second time, not the first time.
Yeah, she gave her
a second chance.
Yeah. And I think that this is also a much younger team. Because of the dismissal of Ruby Whitehorn, what you sort of see is you see how Talasia Cooper is being used. And from a year ago, she stood out. I mean, so athletic, such a prolific scorer. She would run through defenses. She was unguardable. But the way she's being used this season, she's being used as sort of a point wing. And so she's initiating the offense rather than last year when she had a point guard who was able to sort of set things up and then find her in her spots. And so Talasia Cooper has always been a really good passer, but there's a difference between being a really good passer and being the primary ball handler. And, those aren't necessarily one and the same. And so her looks are different.
This is arguably better for her WNBA draft stock because it would give her a chance to be the type of player that she'll need to be at the WNBA level, which is a dual combo focused guard. But that may not be the best thing for Tennessee in 25-26. Not that this is a criticism, frankly, of Kim Caldwell. This is a question of what do you do with the roster that you then have. But I also want to shift over to Louisville, who, again, to be able to limit how much they turned the ball over and limit what they were doing, especially in the second half, is what allowed them to pull way ahead in this game. It's something they've done a really good job of all season. They've been top 20 in the country in taking care of the basketball as measured by turnover percentage. And they have, to my mind, a missing piece that they added this year, and that is Laura Ziegler. And those of you who have followed Natalie Hevron's work over at the Nine Basketball know we have written about Laura Ziegler at St. Joe's, where she was an absolute star in Philly. But I asked Jeff about what the transition was, how that worked. Here's what he had to say about it, talking about her within the context of the kind of five-out way that Louisville plays, which is a totally different style than we were used to colleges playing for a very long time and looks a lot more like the W. I'm curious how much you feel like the college game is really morphing into the way the pro game is played in such a positionless way. Laura's a great example of that. Somebody who's giving you 6 assists out of effectively the power forward position. I'm just wondering how much you feel like that what you're doing is part of a larger trend here in college basketball.
Well, we're going to we have to do it. We don't have, I just talked to our team in the locker room. Laura has really been an asset to us because we don't have 3 or 4 point guards. Raina Scott is our true point guard, and then Taj will run it sometimes, and Mari will run it. But now being able to put Laura there has really helped take some pressure off the rest of them. So for us, it's just in need that she does it, but she's very good at it. She sees the floor, she can pass it, she scores the ball well. I thought she rebounded. It's like I told her, I took her out there in the third quarter to give her a breather, and then she never went back in just for the fact we were on a roll. And I don't sub to just sub. And she's our kids are great because they understand that. When things are going well, I'm not trying to break things up. So it was just a great basketball game. I thought, we gave it back to them a few times. We got up 9, got up 7, and then we had some silly turnovers, unforced ones. We get a rebound, take a dribble, they come take it from us and shoot a layup. Overall, I think we had 6 kids in double figures, and then our 4th one had 9. I mean, our 7th one had 9. So that's how we have to play. I don't think we have someone that can drop 30. But we've got 6 or 7 that can get between 18 and 10. So it does make us difficult to guard as long as we execute.
And just the other on Laura specifically, obviously these are the things she was doing at St. Joe's before she came to you, but coming to Louisville, a place where you've graduated so many players going on to the next level, what are the things she can enhance in her game this year? And have you already seen them that are going to help her get to that WNBA level next year?
I think she's showing everybody what she did at St. Joe's, she's able to do in the Power 4. That's sometimes the question. But you're not playing in the Power 4 league. There are great players in all leagues. There's just a stigma of this is Power 4. No, they're great players. And Laura's just doing what she did at St. Joe's here. It's remarkable. And I've told every WNBA person that I've talked to that asked me, I'm drafting her somewhere. I mean, it might not be a first-round pick, wherever, but I am drafting the kid. And she's going to make a roster. She's the player you're going to watch for the first day and be like, how good is she really? Athletically, can she hang? Can she do this? And then you're just going to watch her. Okay, she can pass it. She can shoot it. She can score. She's a great kid. She's a locker room kid. And then she'll make the team at player 12, possibly. And then by the first game, she'll be at number 8 or 9. And that's who she is. She is the kid I think you have to have on your team because she can play.
So from my perspective, it was really gratifying to hear Jeff Walls say this because, and Jackie, you can verify this, I've been saying this for a long time, but I have never, and people may not know this, taken any teams to the Final Four or won quite as many games as Jeff Walls did. So to hear him say it in precisely the same way, it is worth noting, just my one parenthetical, Laura is now north of 40% from 3 so far this year. So on top of everything she was already doing at St. Joe's, she is at that next level. I can also confirm from conversations with WNBA front office members that she's very much on people's radars. Let her be on yours. But we're going to move on to Court Vision. And for those of you who are listening, audio only, I would urge you to hop onto YouTube for this part as well, because we have Jackie Powell, yes, but we have Jackie Powell PowerPoint coming your way. And we're going to be talking about something really significant that keeps getting talked about and then moved past, which is net and gross revenue. Because this is, by the way, where the last bit of CBA negotiations are being fought, I would argue, right now. So Jackie, take us through what it means, who you had a chance to speak to about it, and what it all means for the remaining negotiations.
For sure. And Howard, I appreciate the build up there. Yes, I do have a PowerPoint, which I will be putting on to the screen momentarily. If you all thought I was a nerd before, now this is the absolute confirmation that I 1000% am a nerd. But I think when explaining this type of stuff, I think visuals are really important. And so this week I was able to talk to, a couple of people familiar with the negotiations on both sides, on both the WNBA side and the WNBPA side, so the players. And so there's a lot of, the phrase that a lot of folks use is that both sides remain very far apart. And so I've been trying to think, well, what exactly does that mean? Far apart on what? And so what it comes down to is these two concepts, which are net revenue share and gross revenue share. And these are two systems.
Can we just briefly define what is gross revenue, what is net revenue for the listener?
Absolutely. So it's time for PowerPoint. Okay, here we go.
By the way, we wear nerd as a badge of honor here. Let's just be clear about that.
Yes, we do. So here and I'm also going to use a hypothetical to explain what each system means. But let's first start with the net revenue. So essentially, what net revenue means is this is a system where expenses are taken out first before the players are able to get their share of money. Now, Howard, before I move on, would you like to explain sort of what type of expenses we're talking about here?
Sure. And it's worth noting as well that this is something the league has talked about throughout this process, the idea that expenses being a significantly greater part of what they are spending than other leagues. This is not a nonsense statement. There are obviously push and pull that go along with how much it is and how much, frankly, the players should be responsible for their share of the lift. But the league, going back to its capital raise a few years ago of $75 million, needed to do this because in a lot of ways, more established leagues that have infrastructure in place for everything from the website to marketing folks to people who you need to be able to take business level meetings. You need people power, you need technology power. And when you looked around the corner where you'd expect it at the WNBA, instead you'd see a sign that said construction in progress, because the WNBA just never invested in these kinds of things, didn't have the money to do it, didn't have the vision up top to know you needed to do it, and did not have the buy-in for the owners, even if you did come to that conclusion. So you put all that together, and the WNBA has had a lot of work to do, and it's not done. So it's just worth keeping that in mind. Again, this is an agnostic statement. I'm not sitting here saying, well, that should all be the league's responsibility. I'm not sitting here saying, well, the players should have to lift instead of getting the revenue for the product they're putting on the floor. That is, again, as we live in the gray area, where the negotiation is taking place.
Right. I mean, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, another example of an expense could be updating the infrastructure that comes with officiating in the league.
No question about it. Every time you say, gee, why isn't the WNBA doing X? It's probably because the WNBA has yet to invest in it and needs to. Well, that stuff costs money. So who is paying for it is one question, but the other, and the question that no one really has in their own minds, is, oh, this stuff needs to happen.
Yeah. So let's move back to our handy dandy PowerPoint here. So net revenue, essentially what that means is that the league is deducting a percentage of the total revenue that is made before they are able to share that money with the players. So let's take a look at this hypothetical. Let's say that the full pot is $1 million. We obviously know that the WNBA makes more, but I wanted to give you all a nice round number. So under a net revenue system, the league will deduct, so this is also part of it too. So the league is going to deduct first, but the number we do not know from any of the reporting that has come out, right, Howard? We don't know the percentage of how much the league is going to deduct.
Right.
We could do some sort of math because I believe Front Office Sports, ESPN, and The Athletic have all reported that under this net revenue system, the players would only get 15% of that total, in our example, $1 million pot. But anyway, in this hypothetical, so the first thing, the league is going to deduct 45% of the total revenue the league makes. Our full pot is $1 million. So what that means is, here we go, we're taking $450,000 away from the total pot. And so the new pot which is where the players are going to get their share from, is now down to $550,000. And so then what happens is, and as this has been reported by those outlets as well, the league is proposing that the players get, I believe it's 15 or 50% in excess in a net revenue sharing model. So what that means is then you would take 50% of the new pot, which is $550,000, and then that becomes $275,000. That is the player's share.
And by the way, Jacob Mox has also done a great job of breaking this down for us over at the 9 Basketball. I do just want to point out about this point, because it's a really good one, is that it's not just, okay, well, it's either net or gross. And the two sides are far apart because you can only have defined it as one way or the other. All of these individual expenses are bargaining points. All of these individual expenses are ways to get to the midpoint between these two things. And figuring out who's responsible for what and being able to negotiate it on a piece-by-piece basis is how you actually get there. You can do it a couple of different ways. You can do it by saying it's X percentage. You could say, all right, players, you're responsible for the revenue on this side of things. And we'll, in terms of, for instance, apparel, it'll be based on gross revenue, or it'll be based on net revenue for apparel, but we're going to take it on gross revenue as it relates to a different item. I mean, all of which is to say, there are so many different ways to get there by thinking creatively and just having buy-in from both sides.
So it's not an all or nothing. And that's,
Exactly.
I think, what Howard is trying to explain here. And what I'm walking you all through is just sort of the systems, the step-by-step as to how this gets done. So as Howard was saying, when it comes to that net revenue system, with an individual item, as you said, like merchandise, that's sort of the process that is going to be, gone through. That doesn't mean for the entire kit and caboodle here. So let's now move on. We'll return to our PowerPoint here. And let us move on to what gross revenue, or what a gross revenue model entails. Here we go. So gross revenue essentially means, or a gross revenue model means that the league is not deducting first. So in our hypothetical example, the full pot is $1 million, and the
Same full pot.
Yes. The full pot is 1 million in our example. And what has been reported is that the players want 30% of that full pot before deductions. So you take 30% out of 1 million and you get $700,000, and then you subtract the $700,000 from 1 million, and then you get $300,000. That is the player's share through a gross revenue system. And so I also want to make note that when we're talking about players' share, we aren't just talking about salary. And that was something new that I learned, right? It's their salary, it's their benefits, health benefits, mental health benefits, housing, 401k, retirement. It's a lot of things that goes into their share. So even in my little example, you can see as to what the discrepancy is between what has been reported as the league's proposal and the player's proposal. And you see that the player's proposal obviously gets the players more, in this hypothetical, $300,000, rather than in the league's hypothetical here with $275,000.
But it's also really worth noting that they ain't that far apart in this example. As we're looking at it, the differences are not the difference between one system and the other system, and they're massive and they're irreconcilable. It is very clear that a good faith effort from both sides can get you to bridge that gap if, in fact, both sides are looking for a solution.
I think the note I also want to make is that I did not do the full math to reflect what also has been reported. So from The Athletic, from Front Office Sports, and from ESPN, there is this number, this 15% number that the PA believes that using just a net revenue system for everything would get them 15% of the total pot. So I have not done the hypothetical math using that 15% to sort of see, what that number could be. So I think there is a universe where they could be more far apart. Those two numbers could be more far apart than what I'm presenting.
I don't mean to suggest that these are the numbers. I'm simply
they're not.
saying that you can see it's not A and Z, that there are, in fact, a whole lot of ways in which you're able to bridge the gap where it's not quite the massive gap that's at times been portrayed.
Yeah, I think your all or nothing point is huge, right? I mean, so clarify for me. So in these negotiations, the league could say, okay, for merchandise sales only, we're going to do a net revenue system, but then for ticket sales, we're going to do gross. Is that something that could be on the table?
Every individual item is potentially negotiable. And we've talked to folks familiar with where the PA is coming from at this point, where the league is coming from at this point, and there are all kinds of ways to be able to bridge that gap to make the math work. Again, the other axis, and we talked about this on last week's show, is the difference between does revenue go up or down, or are you looking for a guaranteed amount of revenue, or are you looking for a guaranteed percentage of revenue? With the idea being we're seeing this massive jump as media rights deal with ESPN and company takes place into next year, but that's an 11-year deal, and that is the primary driver financially for any league's overall finances. So this is a lot to say that it's far more complicated than the players are this, the owners are that, and everything else is irreconcilable. There's a lot more. And so in 2026, fearless prediction, we will have a lot more to say about this, whether there is a strike or not, whether there is a work stoppage that affects the league or not, whether there is a decision made and a deal reached, and then we get the opportunity to talk through all the details of what all of it means. And we didn't even talk about the fact that players getting fixed percentage, whatever that decision is, you still have to see how it breaks out among max salaried players, minimum salaried players. What does the salary cap look like? What is the impact on veterans? I will beat the drum on this forever. If the salary cap increase does not match the increase on maximum salaries and rookie salaries, veterans, the middle class, the people who built this league are going to feel the impact, and the ability to have a career in the WNBA is going to be affected by it. So I really hope the veterans are paying attention. I know some of them are. They all do. So much more to get to in 2026. Jackie Powell, I'm so glad we get the chance to do this every single week. It makes me so happy.
Yes. And what Howard was alluding to is we have a special show that will be coming out next week, I believe. And it's going to include sort of the year in women's sports. And so we'll be on this show along with our wonderful colleagues who have been doing the soccer edition and Kathleen Geyer. And then on the hockey side, we've had
Maya Smith. Amazing. Yes.
And so, yeah, expect some CBA predictions from the two of us when you watch that episode next week.
Some arguments. We don't come to blows, but we have respectful disagreement.
We do.
Because that's what makes the clicks go up, right? That's why we do it. We do it all for the clicks.
No, we do it because these stories matter. Anyway, this has been Jackie Powell.
And Howard Megdal.
And have a lovely holiday.